Let me read to you a passage from the Gospel of St. Luke, chapter 11, verses 42 to 46. It's the Gospel for Wednesday of the 28th week in Ordinary Time. St. Luke writes, Jesus said, "Woe to you, Pharisees, because you give God a tenth of your mint, rue, and all other kinds of garden herbs, but you neglect justice and the love of God. You should have practiced the latter without leaving the former undone. Woe to you, Pharisees, because you love the most important seats in the synagogues and greetings in the marketplaces. Woe to you, because you are like unmarked graves, which men walk over without knowing it." One of the experts in the law answered him, "Teacher, when you say these things, you insult us too." Jesus replied, "And you experts in the law, woe to you, because you load people down with burdens they can hardly carry, and you yourselves will not lift a finger to help them." That's from Luke chapter 11, verses 42 to 46. What does it suggest to us? Well, there is a dominant thread in the strictures that our Lord directs against the religious leaders in our passage today that I've just read. Woe to you, Pharisees, our Lord says, because you give God a tenth of your mint, rue, and all other kinds of garden herbs, but you neglect justice and the love of God. You should have practiced the latter without leaving the former undone. So our Lord here is not criticizing them for performing faithfully these particular practices. The practice our Lord is commenting on here would seem to be one based on Leviticus chapter 27 verses 30 to 32, which stipulated that all tithes of the land levied on the produce of the earth or the fruit of the trees belonged to Yahweh. It was based on that, it seems. The Pharisees whom our Lord was addressing were punctilious in their observance of this, the way they applied it, even perhaps to excess in care for detail. But our Lord does not criticize the practice itself. After all, as I said, it would appear to have been an application of Leviticus 27. We may regard the practices of the Pharisees mentioned here as, well, being part of their plan of religious life, founded on their interpretation of, say, Leviticus. Broadly speaking, our Lord expected and in fact commended this in the Pharisees, for he says that they should have practiced these things. That is to say, our Lord not only did not call into question such religious regulations if adhered to in sincerity and good faith, but he expected that they be respected. Our Lord's critique related not to such practices in themselves, but to the spirit in which they were fulfilled. It involved the neglect of what should have been the heart, the soul, and the purpose of any such religious regime. Justice and the love of God were being left undone, and were being replaced by a self-centered and prideful religion. These practices ought directly to have served the flourishing in their lives of love for God and justice towards others. Instead, they were performed with ostentation, with excess, and with self-commendation. Their own actions were the object of their regard, and God and neighbour were on the margins. Taking the point more broadly and applying it to a wider setting, this particular observance of the Pharisees, which our Lord actually commended, can be taken as reminding us of the gamut, the range of legitimate, recommended and authorized observances of religion. A concrete plan of spiritual life will involve a range of judicious and approved religious practices. Our Lord's passing remark that you should have practiced the latter suggests indeed that he expects some definite regime of religious living in a person's life. There should be what we may call a concrete plan of life, which will involve specific steps to sustain and nourish the spirit of religion. This applies to the religious life of all of us. An unstructured, unpatterned, unregulated daily religious life is unrealistic and doomed to failure. It is man's responsibility to practice his religion in the concrete. The practice of prayer will involve certain prayers, generally also at certain times. The practice of self-denial will involve concrete acts of self-denial. And if the spirit of self-denial is to grow, there will be included in one's plan of life regular acts of self-denial. The practice of charity will include concrete acts of charity. And if the spirit of charity is to grow over the course of time, there will be a planned regime of acts of charity. Christ our Lord will commend such a plan of life if it is subject to the discipline of the Church, as in, say, Lent, and prudent guidance. But its true and fundamental purpose must inform its constant practice. The specific things we do to live out our religious life must be performed with the purity of a heart that seeks union with God and the fulfillment of His will. In a word, we must have a plan of life that disciplines our life towards its true goal and which makes practical our dreams and intentions of holiness. But we must beware of the trap into which these, though not all, Pharisees fell. Our plan of religious life must subserve the grand goal of a flourishing in our heart of the most perfect charity possible. Our Lord was once asked which was the greatest commandment of the law. The greatest and the first was, our Lord replied, that we love God with our whole being. The second was like it, that we love our neighbour as ourselves. Our Lord would teach His disciples that His love for us was to be our model in loving our neighbour. Let us every day place love, the love of Christ, at the forefront of all we do, and at the forefront of our whole religious life.